Hello everyone, this is Jonathan Little, and today I'm going to be reviewing a hand with you from the 2015 World Series of Poker Final Table. This hand is hand 41. On the first day of play, they ended up getting through about 75 hands or so. So this is around midway through the first day out of 3 at the Final Table. And let's take a look at the chip stacks before too much action takes place. We have Stern here with 35,100. So I want to make it clear, whenever I'm going through these hands, I just chop off the last 3 zeros because my brain works significantly better thinking 35,100 compared to 35 million or 3.5 million. It seems like I get confused whenever that happens. So whenever I find myself deep in a tournament, I just chop off the first 3 zeros off numbers and it makes things way easier, at least for me. So we're playing 250, 500. Again, we're actually playing 250,000, 500,000. And Stern, with 35,100, has ace-jack. If you look around the table, there are 4 players who are all fairly short, with about 30 big blinds or less. McKeon, who is the chip leader with 150 big blinds. And then Bloomfield and Stern both have a reasonable amount of chips, like 50 to 75 big blinds. So the 2 players involved in this hand are actually the deep stacks, and that's going to become very important in my analysis of this hand as we progress. So I think Stern's raise with ace-jack to 2.1 big blinds or so is perfectly standard. And then McKeon decides to defend the big blind with ace-8 offsuit. If I was actually the chip leader here, I would strongly consider re-raising because he can apply a ton of pressure to Stern because, as I just said, Stern is really not going to want to go broke before any of these players who are short stacks. But calling's certainly fine. I have no problem with that. Flop comes ace-ace-queen. Pretty nice flop for Stern. McKeon checks. Stern bets 1,400 into the 2,900 pot. And at this point, McKeon has only one real option. I think calling is the only play that makes any sense. If he raises, that's going to allow Stern to play really well, unless he thinks Stern is just blatantly crazy. And so far in this final table, Stern has been relatively in line, and McKeon's been relatively in line. I mean, they've both 3-bet a few times with bluffs and been active enough, but neither of them are just like trying to blast their stacks in. So I think you need to check call with ace-8 in this spot and see what develops. Turns of 3, I would again be in check call mode if I was in McKeon's shoes. And I think Stern can certainly value bet. At this point, you have to think McKeon has either an ace or a queen or a pair. And a lot of those hands will call a relatively small bet. However, if Stern does bet and McKeon calls, Stern has to assume he has the best hand, and he probably should be value betting on most rivers. But there are a few that are particularly interesting, and we actually do get one of those rivers. The river is the king. So now let's think about McKeon's flop check calling range, turn check calling range, and river check calling range. Is he going to call a river bet with a queen or something like pocket sevens? And I think if Stern bets anything big at all, like more than 250 or 2,500 in the 11,000 pot, I don't think McKeon's really going to call with very many non-ace hands. So I don't think that a big bet size makes much sense if you're betting for value. So you have to ask yourself now, if I bet big, like say I bet 5,000 or maybe even 11,000, can we ever get McKeon to fold an ace, which is now chopping? And I really don't think that is much of a possibility either. I would have a hard time believing McKeon is going to fold any ace to any reasonable bet. So for that reason, I think Stern either needs to make a very tiny bet or just check. And it may sound kind of crazy to think, oh, you're checking with trips. But if you look at McKeon's river check calling range, it's going to be all the aces that are chopping with you, so that doesn't do you any good. And that's pretty much it, unless he has exactly a hand like king-queen. So for that reason, I think that Stern should check. If the stacks were a little bit different such that the stack sizes were reversed, I think that betting would have a lot more merits because then he's not so concerned with McKeon check raising him. And I guess I need to make this clear. I don't really know the level of sickness McKeon has. I mean, maybe he's just somewhat standard and he's always going to check raise with better hands and always call with chops and worse. So there's very little fear of getting check raised bluffed. But anytime you're second in chips and you're against the big stack, who is probably capable of check raising as a bluff, you really do not want to be betting for somewhat thin value. And I think a lot of people don't recognize that this is a scenario where you are betting for somewhat thin value whenever you value bet this on the river because you are saying that I think he's going to call me with a queen or a king. And I just don't know if that's happening. So I think this is a spot where Stern should actually check behind, be content winning this pot when his opponent has a queen, and just recognizing there's very little value to be had. He does bet 5,000 though. And again, this would be 5 million if the stack sizes were as they were at the final table. And I really dislike this bet because, I mean, for exactly the reason I said, McKeon's never folding an ace. He's going to fold a queen. What are you really getting value from besides exactly king-queen? And also McKeon will sporadically bluff, I think. And also McKeon could have something like ace-3, so you're value betting yourself sometimes. So I don't really like this bet by Stern. The commentator at the final table, Antonio Esfandiari, said he needs to bet here, but I think that was sort of an on-the-cuff answer whenever someone asked what he should do in this spot. I think he should be value betting on all the other rivers besides a king and maybe a 3. No, you still probably need to bet a 3. But I think perhaps a king is the only river you should not be value betting because all the other ones you still have the best hand a lot of the time, or your opponent can have a queen, which is a really good marginal made hand that is a bluff catcher. But here, the queen gets so much worse to where I don't really think you can justify a value bet unless, of course, McKeon thinks that Stern is crazy. If McKeon thinks Stern is crazy, then Stern should probably be value betting. But neither of these players was blatantly bonkers. On November 12th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, I'm going to be reviewing a lot of hands from this 2015 World Series of Poker main event final table. Fortunately, we have all the hole cards, thanks to ESPN, and we'll be able to go through all the plays that I think were great, and also some of the plays that I thought were not so good, and there are quite a few that I thought were not too amazing. I'll also be going through a few individual chip modeling situations, such as the hand where the player busted on the second hand of the day. That was an interesting spot, and I thought that his call was actually very close, and sure enough, it was. So we're going to be discussing some of those scenarios as well. As the stacks get short, there really is a lot of payout implications, and if you play well in those spots on a regular basis, you're going to make way more money than your opponents. So we're going to be discussing a lot of these deep stacked hands and also a few short stacked hands. So if you want to improve your final table skills, I highly suggest you check out this webinar I'm going to be doing on November 12th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. You can get full information about this webinar in below this video. So check that out. Let me know what you think. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in the webinar.